Guys, welcome back to the channel. Today we'll have a chat with Martin Gibbins, one of my favorite rules writers. I follow Swordpoint, and Ian knows that I'm in love with the rules. Martin, thank you for coming so much, for chatting with us.
Pleasure.
Ian is gonna co-host today because Ian follows the rules as well with me. We play many online battles. A question before. Yeah, that's true. We will fight soon, because now with all these issues, I'm isolated in the Middle East. Anyway, long story. Martin, just a question from me, and Ian will ask his questions, is that I'll be interested to know how you started in wargaming. I mean, how you started, and how did you decide, why did you decide to make your own rules? I mean, what rules did you like? And you saw, let's say, a gap in the rules community that you wanted to fill. You saw something was missing that you wanted to fill. How this came up?
Well, in terms of how long I've been gaming, I'm afraid I started in 1967. So I've been playing for quite a long time. Started with the good old Donald Featherstone rules many, many years ago. His seminal book, The War Game, which got so many people involved. That, along with Airfix figures, are the things we all grew up, well, my lot grew up with. So I come from an old-fashioned historical wargaming direction rather than from Games Workshop direction, which makes me, I suppose, different to quite a few nowadays. The first time I found any of the workshop type rules was the Warhammer Ancient Battle set, which I was introduced to, 20-something years ago. And I got involved with that, and got involved with helping umpire tournaments and things of that nature. And from there, I somehow got involved in what at the time was a group involved in coming up with modifications and improvements to the rules. I did that for a while, and then I was asked to write the second edition of Warhammer Ancient Battles. First time I'd ever actually been involved in a commercial set of rules. Like most people, we dabbled with changes and additions to rule sets of our own in the past to make them work more the way we would like them to. So I was involved in that, which was reasonably well received in the main. But for its own internal reasons, Games Workshop decided to disassociate itself from historical gaming. Not that long after bringing out the second edition of Ancient Battles. So they closed down that section of their business and made the manager, poor old Rob Broom, redundant. And so those rules were no longer supported. And nowadays, it seems to be the case, if a rule set doesn't have content being delivered on a fairly regular basis, the players drift away. Whereas when I was young, you had a set of rules and it might last 20 odd years, but now something that hasn't got a release coming out in the next 6 or 8 months is considered to be withering on the vine. And so that meant that fairly soon there was a hole in the market where Warhammer Ancient Battles used to be, which was that type of game for 28mm figures. And we watched to see what would happen with that, because there were a couple of early contenders for replacements. There's a game called Clash of Empires, which was an interesting mix of Ancient Battles and some mechanisms from Field of Glory, the mill game. And I did actually write some content for them. I wrote one of their supplements to help them along. But it never really seemed to gather any traction, that set. And the other one that came out was Rob Broom's game, which also, although it was beautifully produced and very similar to Ancient Battles, didn't really ever seem to take off. So we were left with a situation where there was no real popular game in the field. The general tendency seemed to be moving gradually towards skirmish games as well for 28mm figures. Smaller scales were still playing large-scale battles, but not in 28. So over time, it did seem that there was still an opportunity to do something that would fit into that pocket. We'd started working on a possible game more or less as soon as Ancient Battles stopped being supported, and it gradually grew over time to what became Swordpoint. It took a long time and a lot of changes. It was quite a while before it became a game of its own, rather than just another Warhammer Ancient Battles clone. I thought there's no point bringing out yet another game which was very much the same as the old one. And it was only when we came up with some of the mechanisms that make Swordpoint fairly unusual that it started to feel like a decent game of its own. I think probably particularly the line of battle that we introduced, and using the figures on multi-bases rather than single bases as a specific requirement of the rules rather than the convenience of the player. Things like that really were the start of it going its own direction. Obviously, if you look now at the Swordpoint game and Warhammer Ancient Battles, there are some vague similarities, but an awful lot of differences. And certainly, as we've had demonstrated to us on many occasions, if someone tries to play Swordpoint like they would play Warhammer Ancient Battles, they always lose. It doesn't work. You have to play the game as it should be played in order for it. So quite happy that what we've come up with in the end is a game of its own, not a knockoff of something else.
Yeah.
So after 3 years of the game being out there, having sold more or less what we printed in the first place, we had to decide what to do next. A lot of game systems seem to take that opportunity to completely rewrite the game and come up with something that bears a resemblance to the previous one, but is actually quite different overall. And that requires people to buy lots of new content. It's a great commercial idea, but we'd rather not get tarred with that particular brush. So we went for an iteration of the rules rather than a complete change. We basically pulled together all of the explanations, errata, feedback from players that we've had over the period. And with a few new bits, we put that all together and came out with the second version that way.
Ian, you want to add something?
Yeah, I want to take you back before even all the rules writing. I'd like to know, what were your first soldiers? Toy soldiers? Was it something your parents bought you? Did you do it yourself? When you were talking about the good old airfix that our generation began with?
Well,
what was your first recollection? What was your first soldiers? The things that got you going?
My original interest has always been in ancient history and mythology, and that was the area that I thought I would like to try and replicate using models. I was lucky my father was interested without being particularly keen in the subject and was quite happy to wander around finding me books to read. And I think he probably found the Donald Featherstone book for me, which of course included a set of rules for ancient period, which were very simple and easy to pick up when you're 10, 11 years old. I got some of the Airfix Romans and Ancient Britons, as a lot of people did, as my first figures. But also, even then, there were manufacturers you could get hold of if you could find out where to go. And I came across one or two of the names, some of which are now gone, people like Greenwood and Ball, which no longer exist, Garrison, and so on. I can remember sending off a handwritten letter with postal order asking for lists of figures that manufacturers made, getting their lists back. No pictures, just a list of figure names, and you had to decide which one you might want. I think the first ones I bought were sixpence in old money, so 2.5p for an infantryman, and a horrendous 1 shilling and sixpence, so what's that, 7.5p for a cavalry figure. I can remember buying some Athenian hoplites from Greenwood and Ball and some Assyrian horse archers as well. In those days, you didn't have army lists or anything, so you bought what you felt like the sound of, and you put them all together in an army. So, so I can remember having Romans and Greeks and Sarmatians and Assyrians playing against ancient Britons and more Romans and some other bits and bobs. You know, the games we used to play then would go on until there were only 6 figures on one side and 2 figures on the other. The rules would allow that to happen. So
was it stealing? Was it stealing the dice from the Monopoly like the rules were nice to do and make up your own? Because they were in the days before we'd even heard.
That's right. You had to use the dice that you had available from somewhere. I think most of my dice came from a Risk board game that I had. So you only had about 5 or 6 dice, so you used to have to throw them out 20 times to get anything resolved. Those were the days.
Now, also, congratulations, you're releasing the 2nd edition of Swordpoint. I ordered it already. Although I know that if you have the first version, you have the amendments that someone can download from Grieving Beast, so people, well, they can get the amendments and they can get them in very actually good quality, and they can have the first edition and also get the latest changes.
Yes, we didn't think it was particularly fair to expect people to necessarily buy the second set when they'd already bought the first set. So this was the solution, really. We have a changes document which we utilised, and we expanded that with all of the edits and additional changes that were done on a to and fro basis with the graphic designer, and put them all into a PDF. So yes, you can. If you're able to make it work, you can use the changes document and your original rule, and you have all the version 2. In actual fact, in one glaring area, you're better off with the changes document than the new rules, because to our intense frustration, when we got the books here, I opened one, immediately went to a page and saw that a sentence that we changed hadn't been changed somehow. And so there's actually an error. You're going to have to put a correction slip in the rule book to tell people about this error. It's so frustrating.
Yeah, I can imagine. Tim, go in. Son.
I was going to say, the times you do buy rule books or games, board games, because I do a lot of board gaming, and the first thing you want when you want the box is an errata sheet. And you think, this shouldn't have to be, if it's all read, checked, and if it's just 1 or 2 things, you can live with that, you can write it in and change it. But sometimes I've got things, you've had an A4 sheet, itemized, and you think, it's brand new, this shouldn't be happening. And even in a 2nd edition, and GMT games are terrible for that. A 2nd edition, 2 or 3 years later, and you still got an errata, and you think, well, look, what's going on? How can there possibly be an errata? You've had it for 3 years, you know the mistakes, but you still get it from some people. And I know it's not just the people writing it; it's the publishers just not copying it as it should be.
Yeah, it can be frustrating, and sometimes the problem is that when you've worked on something for a long time, you can go word blind on it. You know what it's supposed to say. And when it doesn't, you don't always spot it. So you are reliant on the proofreaders and the other people who look at it to pick things up. But we found that even using 4 or 5 different people on it, you still can get something falling through the cracks. We have people that proofread because they're just looking at the grammar and the spelling and capitalization and the layout and all that kind of thing. People who are looking at it to see that the rules are understandable correctly. We have people who are looking at it to see if the rule change is correct. And even with that going on, the occasional error creeps in. The particular one that I'm thinking of, that was a classic issue, we had a paragraph where we changed the first sentence and we changed the last sentence. And I know that the entire change set went through because it's correct in the changes document that we're using for the version 1 upgrade. But somehow when the graphic designer laid it all out, they laid out the last sentence of the paragraph, not the first sentence. And when it was checked, we obviously noted that the last sentence was correct. Just somehow managed to assume that meant the whole paragraph was correct. And it's so easy to do. There you go. So at least we spotted it now, so we can tell people straight away. But yes,
sorry, go on.
So if you get a set which has got a page or more of errata issued with the document, it is a little odd. It shouldn't really happen to that degree. But it's very rare that you can get a book with no mistakes whatsoever. I think we've managed one book where the only mistake I've been told about is a misspelling of a word. So I'm happy with that. If only we could have managed that with the rule set. There you go.
You have greetings from Wayne. He says hello.
Ah, right.
Yeah. And well, we are actually, I'm going to say to you because you haven't heard it, we are playtesting the 100 Years War future release. And I'm very happy that there is a plan for this. So I read it recently. I have to say, it's brilliant. Very good idea. Wayne has a good knowledge of the 100 Years War. He really, it's still a work in progress from what I know. But from what we read, it's very good. It's going to be very good. I mean, it will be a valuable addition to the medieval. He has done a good job actually. But he told me also that you're preparing now a Roman supplement coming soon. Correct? Is that the first one coming next year?
Possibly. It depends how they reach print. We have one called The Rise of Rome, which is basically from the founding of the city of Rome down to about 100 BC, just before, and another one which is Rome and the East, so the interaction east of Greece, basically. Later on, those two are both written. The early Rome one has been proofed and checked, and is just awaiting playtesting of what's in it. The other one is a bit further back. Wayne's working on the 100 Years War one, and I'm currently having to start to work on the War of the Roses.
Okay.
Both the 100 Years War and the War of the Roses were originally down to be done by another writer, an external writer, who unfortunately, through a combination of illness and other issues, wasn't able to complete them. So hence we've had to pick them up, and they've gone back down the schedule. It would have been more recent. The 100 Years War one and the early Rome one I'm pleased with, because we've managed to take off in slightly different directions. So we've always said we wanted the supplements to have a variety of games and so forth in we could. The first few we've done mainly include numbers of different scenarios for use with different sizes of armies.
Yeah.
Nothing quite beyond that, but in these other ones we've gone a step further. So in the early Rome book, there's actually a mini game in the middle of it, which is played on a map. So it's effectively a small board game, which is trying to show the problems faced by Hannibal when corralled in central Italy, fighting the Romans, trying to keep his allies happy. And so it's a strategic game rather than a tabletop tactical game, something just a bit different. And we asked Wayne to try in his war book to come up with a campaign type game. I'm hoping he's done that. I haven't seen it yet.
No, because we're checking it. Yeah, because I follow 100 Years War, as you know, a lot, and from the posts I do in your groups in Facebook, and I read a lot. The army list I read and the special rules, and he gave me a draft idea of the campaign. It looks very well thought, very well designed. I think it's going to be a very successful book. I believe it. So and it stands, as you said, it stands on its own. You know, you have your mini campaign, and you can have your rules and your special rules and your army list. And from what I read, it's going to be very good. But I'm sure pretty sure that many are going to wait for the Wars of the Roses also. Wars of the Roses seem to be very popular in,
Yes,
in England.
It's
I don't know why, but it is.
It's taking a while because it's not one of my core areas of interest. So my knowledge isn't as deep as it needs to be. So at present I'm plowing through various textbooks on the subject and making copious notes. And I've more or less completed the historical framework up to 1483, but I haven't got beyond that, and I haven't started work on the armies or the actual game content yet. I'm going to try and ensure that what we get out of there is a campaign type arrangement. Again, we're just trying to make something different. People want the minimum amount of history they need to know to understand the subject. They want some nice varied extra army lists as much as is possible, period. And then they want something to play which is different from just putting some toys on the table and going from there. Not that there isn't a good place for that. We do try to have reconstructions, if you like, of very famous battles or scenarios which are completely different in size and scope. So the early Rome book starts with a cattle race, where there are quite small numbers of figures involved running around the table trying to steal their opponent's herds of cattle, which is an entertaining thing in its own right. It doesn't require that you have a large army. But you need things like that at one end. At the other end, in the same book, there is a recreation of the Battle of Cannae, which will require a whole club plus units involved. But I don't think you should exclude things like that from the mere fact that it requires a cooperative venture to put it on. In some ways, makes it more interesting. So someone can buy the supplement and get the club involved in that recreation. They enjoy it. Got some more customers.
Ian, you want to ask a question?
Yeah, I was going to say the campaign system. I mean, we all are fighting one-off battles. Nik and I have fought quite a few now, but there's always what came before and what repercussions are going to be after. And like with a chevauchée, you're setting off with an aim in mind, and you've got different forces moving around basically on a map. So you don't quite know who you're going to meet, what strength they're going to be in, and actually where the battle's going to take place. So like something like a Grand Chevauchée is great fun to play. Then if you can link that again with a campaign game, where you're actually fighting a campaign, and again, something like the Chevauchée, but on a larger scale. You don't need thousands of figures because you use the same figures. They're not all going to meet at once, or hopefully they're not. But that, to me, is a massive part of any rule set. If you've got something like that, scenarios are great, and you can link scenarios, but a proper campaign, that is, I think that so many people are crying out for that sort of game.
Yeah, there are a lot of different ways of doing campaigns like that. Many of them are already out there. You can. The issue with a campaign is always a question of the depth to which you're going to go in order to make it work. You can come up with a system which will allow you to go right down into the detail of logistical supplies to the armies. Is there enough food in the area that you're working through to support the forces? Is there the money there to pay them? How can you influence those in a variety of ways other than the tabletop? You can make it as detailed or as superficial as you want, but at the end of the day, what you're really doing is just adding a strategic element to people's gaming. Some people look at that kind of campaign as being that's what they want to do, and they're quite happy to allow other people to play the games for them. Other people use the campaign just as an excuse to put some figures on the table in slightly different ratios to what they might normally have. I can remember playing campaigns where you have to do sieges and things. I can remember trying to replicate a Roman town on the floor, actually, not the table, using several versions of the old Airfix Roman fort, for the walls, polystyrene walls as extras, waiting for the other guy to put out all the troops that were coming to attack the town, so forth. And that can be great fun. You've got the biggest problem with campaigns is the more complex you make them, the longer they last, the more likely it is that some of the players are going to drop out. And that then causes trouble for other people. So I think we'll probably generally try and keep ourselves to quite a simple format, the kind of campaign that can be carried through over perhaps 3 or 4 club nights, fortnight between friends playing over the internet and so forth, rather than leaving it any longer, because any longer it can be wonderfully detailed, very satisfying, certainly for umpires and people that create it, but it's not necessarily going to get finished by the players, because there's always something else they want to do after a few weeks. So we do have to be careful with that. You know, if you want to play the campaign to the nth degree, you go and get a copy of Tony Barth's old book, The Hyboria Campaign, which has got the rules in it for almost anything that you can manage to do. Right, you know, even down to writing newspaper articles to publish to your friends about it, which is lovely.
Yeah. I was thinking of the Impetus, the Impetus magazines that came out a few years back, and they used to always have a campaign in it. Very simple system. There was virtually no bookkeeping, and it was done on a map. You just moved a counter about, and when the armies met up, and it just worked on a point system, depending on how many battles you'd won or lost, generals, you know, that type of thing. Very simple, but really enjoyable. And as you say, you could play that over 2 or 3, 4 sessions.
Well, can I ask something about Swordpoint now? Just go a bit into the details. Me and Ian are playing Swordpoint all the time. I really like the rules. I've heard you in your interview in, I think it's called War Games Magazine. I think that's called.
War Games Illustrated.
The War Games Illustrated. That and I've realized that when I was playing the game that your aim while what it was designing was that a coherent battle line, an army that has a coherent battle line would beat any super unit anytime, because that was actually the case. Many times that I've reviewed the rules in my channel, I've said, and we discussed it with Ian many times, that for me, how do I understand? No, how do I let you judge if a rule set is good for me, I like it, or if it's good? While I play, I stop and I watch my battlefield. If what I see on the battlefield reminds me of what I know of the era, because I know a lot of the 100 Years' War era, you know what I mean? If what I see reminds me of a medieval battle, you know, the anarchy, the unpredictability, for example, we're talking about specifically medieval battle, Viking battle, irregular lines that suddenly units are pushing front and units are pushed back, and suddenly every turn the line of battle changes and the support changes, and you become suddenly you win, you push, and suddenly you find yourself isolated among enemies. If a rule set if a rule set shows me this, it means that it's doing something good, and I believe in Swordpoint. This is exactly what you've managed to successfully produce. A rule set that is not, I don't like static rule sets. I don't like rule sets. I don't know if my wording is correct. I don't like rule sets that 2 units fight, immobile, like they're sitting down until one breaks. I like the line of battle. I like the battlefield to be a living thing. I don't know if what I'm saying makes any sense.
Yes.
And your rules are portraying this very well. The pushbacks, the melee reactions, the line of battle, the support between units that is stronger. You divide that is stronger than a unit, although a super unit is stronger. Now I'm talking. You should talk, not me. But is this what you were aiming for? Is this you were aiming a strategic rule set that would portray the medieval era beginning and the ancient era as close as possible?
Yes, that's very much what we're aiming for. I've seen any number of rule sets where firstly, they start looking like armies on the table, and then units seem to pinwheel off in all directions until you can't really work out what's going on, or even sometimes which units belong to which side, because it's all become so disjointed. And that's not my idea of how history is supposed to work. So we tried to come up with a system where armies would operate much like their historical counterparts, in the sense of having a coherence to them until the point of collapse, which time everything just disintegrates in chaos. We wanted that, but we didn't want to do it by telling people you must play like this. I think if you prescribe things, then the game is not interesting. People have to be free to experiment, find out, yes, actually it does work better this way. So that's what we tried to do. We put in mechanisms which would incidentally mean that when players understood the best way to get the most out of their units, their forces on the table would look like a historical army, and the game would.
Yeah.
That's what we set out to do. And it also, I think, that plus the momentum token system give you a lot of cut and thrust and interest in what's going on in each round of combat, because you have to make decisions at various points on the table about where you're going to put some extra support using the momentum. Do you need to shore up this area where things are going badly? Do you risk pushing everything behind that successful unit and trying to make a breakthrough? And you don't know what your opponent's going to do, what you've got. And that system with the momentum does seem to me to work quite nicely, in that you can gain an advantage or mitigate a disadvantage using tokens on any individual turn. But as multiple turns go by, ever so gradually, the initiative will move in one direction, and the tokens will start to rack up in one direction until it gets picked up. But being light on momentum tokens is not a death sentence. Just slightly inconvenient for you. But if your units are still in formation, then you'll still survive it. Of course, the battle line mitigation will stop being broken just by changing tokens. But if you're out of position and out of luck, effectively, then you're in trouble. And that's the way it should be.
Yeah. Ian, you want to say something about the rules we played together?
Yeah, I find just when we do play, you constantly, the initial layout of your army is vital to begin with. But then when you do move, you're looking, have I got support here? What support would he get? If I hit that unit there, have I got enough support to counter the support he's got? And if I do that, what am I going to do with my left flank? Because I'm leaving them the unit of initiative and equipment. It's a constant. Well, it's a chess game. It's a chess game with deciding where as you said, where you're going to strengthen and where you're going to weaken. You can't be strong everywhere. Something's got to go, and you've got to make that choice. And we've done it a couple of times where we've snatched defeat from the jaws of victory just simply by your units. Eventually, they've got where they needed to get to, but eventually they've gotten so weak that they eventually break. And you think, oh, just one more roll. But that's the part of it that we love, because you just don't know. You think I've got this game sorted. We won this, and then the next 10, it's totally changed, which is great.
Yeah, you never. I think it's a sign of a reasonably balanced game. You never quite have enough of anything to do everything you want to do. You can always make a plan work, but you have to accept that the trade-off can't be strong. As you say, you can't be strong everywhere. You can't attack it well all along the line. Another thing, really, unfortunately, the average table size we use isn't really wide enough for the game to get its full impact. And it's not so obvious necessarily in medieval games where the armies are smaller in real terms. Unless you're playing with some of the Eastern armies, you don't need room for cavalry to swirl around the edges of the field. But if you can play the game on an 8-foot wide table rather than 6-foot wide table, it does create additional interest in a sense, because there's more room for the cavalry arms to maneuver around. And in the game, a successful flank attack is devastating. You don't always, if you fill the whole table side to side with solid lines of troops, then you don't get the opportunity often to do that kind of thing. It's nice to present yourself with the problem caused by having an open flank that you've got to do something about. In reality, in historical games, quite often a skilled general will secure one of his flanks on a piece of terrain, but it's unusual for him to be able to do that with both of them, because that gives the enemy such a disadvantage that most enemy armies with any ability would in reality have just moved around to a different area and made them fight on a less disadvantageous ground. So but on the war games table, if you've got a big army, only 6-foot wide table, you can more or less fill the whole board. Or some people will put their whole army in one corner of the table and then fill out the gaps until they're in a sort of fortress lager in the corner, which is a great shame. You should try and prevent people from doing that sort of thing, and make them protect their flanks somehow, because that also affects army composition. You see at some tournaments, the armies that turn up are optimized for tournaments on a certain size of table, playing in a certain way. And that doesn't bear much resemblance to reality in the sense of what you would have in your army and how you would use it. So I do like the idea of large tables wherever possible. I accept that the average gaming table does tend to be 6 feet by 4 feet for a variety of reasons, not least of which that's what you can get on a dining table, often being the basic thing. But if you can play on bigger tables, I was talking to someone earlier today who was asking me, he said he had the ability to put up a 12-foot wide table now, and he and his friends wanted to know how many points they should be playing on that 12-foot wide table. Could they do 2,000, 3,000, even more? Most you should go for on an 8-foot table is probably 1,250 or at the maximum 1,500 points. Otherwise, all you're doing is playing a 6-foot wide game with more figures. And it doesn't give you anything different in the sense of what the game is. You need to have to worry about that wide open space out on the left flank where there's no convenient wood or no river or anything like that. You've got to use troops in a proper deployment to cover against the problem of being outflanked, which is it's more satisfying to deal with that sort of problem because you're closer to doing what your historical counterpart would have had to do. That's what you should be trying to achieve, really.
Nick's a stickler for orders of battle. I mean,
yeah.
He makes sure that the English only have a set number of archers, set number of men-at-arms. The knights are usually pretty poor, and you've never got enough to go from table edge to table edge, so that rarely occurs in our battle. But there again, on the other hand, it doesn't overload the French. They've got more units, but they tend to be less effective. So we've had some great games like that, and we've had knights on the flank and coming around with flank. It does make a big difference there.
Yeah, it's. I want to ask you something, Simon, because I've noticed in the rules. Martin. You are in goal gaming many years. You know that many gamers looking for and I have friends of mine who are really, when they read a rule set, they're looking for or complex or innovative activation rules. And Swordpoint doesn't have activation rules. I like it because I think your philosophy in this one, and believe me, because I've played your game a lot, is that as soon as you deploy the army in the old days, that was it. I mean, the commander could really could really help the army by being there to raise morale or by fighting in the front rank. I understand this, but you know that many gamers and many games, like activation rules, you roll 2d6, you move only 3 units or you move some units twice, you know how it works. What was your philosophy behind this and you decided to make simple activation straightforward? I always wanted to ask you this.
Yeah, it's an interesting area. There's no doubt that by not restricting the ability of the player to move all of his units, we do give them certain opportunities which say are ahistorical, in the sense that they're able to maneuver the units to meet a threat that the player can see from on high, which on the table, a real battlefield might not have been so obvious. The thing is, I suppose, at the end of the day, we're playing a game, and you pitch the game to play in the way that you feel is most suitable for what you're trying to achieve. We have put in, there are certain limited command and control features within the game. For example, there are restrictions on the number of commanders available to armies that we consider to have inferior command and control. So you'll find that, for example, some armies might have as few as 4 commanders allowed to them, whereas others will have 6, or in many cases, 8. But the armies where they have 8 commanders there are issues with the commanders themselves. They have less ability to improve the morale of their troops and so forth. And we do make it so that units cannot be rallied if they're outside the command radius or command figure and so on. So there are limited areas in which we place some restrictions. But in other areas, we thought that having either a limited activation or the kind of system you get with ALCs or any of the warlord rules where you get blunders, which can force units to do completely daft things, push you through double 6. Almost every group I know that plays those rules has changed that rule. And I think if that's the case, that's a good sign that it's not something players want in the game. Yeah, we could have gone down a pip type thing or a card-driven activation, but we decided simply to keep that element of the game open. Equally, we haven't placed extra restrictions on maneuverability for barbarian armies and things like that. We haven't said you can't move backwards, you can't wheel, you can only go straight forward. We did try that, and in the playtesting game, before we settled on the final format, there were actually quite a few rules which affected command and control for barbarian armies in the ancient world. But over the testing time, we found that the frustrations of the players were such that we decided to remove them. The players that we were using to test didn't want that kind of feature in the game that they wanted to play. And I suppose you could also say that because our game is aimed at a particular market niche, it was aimed at the big battle 28 mil figure gaming area, which had been vacated by Warhammer Ancient Battles, that we should probably stick, in some areas at least, to a familiar pattern with the rules. That game didn't have any command and control features, so we've put a few in, but not completely changed away from that format. Otherwise, we could have ended up with a game that was a 28 mil version of one of the 15 mil rule sets that are out there. Not that you can't play Swordpoint with any size of figures you like, of course, but that's probably the underlying reason.
Yeah. You have also Milites Mundi, correct? This is for 15mm. This is interesting. I haven't read the rules because I don't have many 15s, but this is because I know when you released the rules, and I could see from the groups, many people were asking how we can play. Can we have the distances? Can we have, I don't know, the whatever the measurements. So Milites Mundi is basically for 15 miniatures playing Swordpoint, correct?
It is virtually Swordpoint. It's Swordpoint where a unit is a single base. So you can use any size of figures. You could, if you wish, play it 28mm figures. It's actually designed for 10mm as the primary scale. No coincidence that we brought out some 3 10mm ranges to be used for it. But I mean, all our testing games were played using 6mm. And we've got a couple of very nice armies of late Romans and Sassanid Persians in 6mm that we use for a lot of testing, as well as our 10mm Romans and Germans, Parthians as well. So yes, it's similar to Swordpoint, but a lot of things are changed and streamlined to work with the concept of single base being a unit, which means the differences can be subtle, but they're definitely there, and it's a similar game but not an identical game. There are quite a few people who have actually told me they prefer play Milites Mundi, which okay. I like the game. It looks very nice on the table if you're playing it in a small scale, because you have that lovely feel of a proper army, which in 28mm, the models are nicer individually, and a unit looks very, very nice. The army looks relatively small. You get used to it, but it still looks relatively small.
Yeah.
Whereas you're playing with small scale figures on these bases. The unit is 80mm by 40mm. You have a lot of units on the table, and it really does look nice, especially when you fill that base with figures. Do with 6mm. I've seen someone playing with 2mm figures, and that looked ridiculous. Interesting. So yes, that's it. It's for people that want to play in smaller scales and don't want any form of figure.
Yeah. Ian, do you want to add something?
Yeah, I want to go back to the Wars of the Roses, because I've got 28mm Wars of the Roses army, and I've never found a suitable set yet. So if you're going to have a Swordpoint version of that, well, yeah, I'll have some of that. I'm looking forward to seeing that when it eventually hits the printers and comes out onto the shelves.
Yeah, it's trying to give it the right play. That's the thing. It's a very interesting period, the War of the Roses, because from what I've found so far, there are quite a lot of variations in the armies depending on which phase of the wars you're involved with and which foreign powers have had any influence upon it. The warfare in England at that time is, certainly at the start of the wars, is, shall we say, a little archaic according to the lights of the modern continental soldier of the time. I mean, where are the pikes? Where are the handguns? And so forth. Where is all the new stuff? Why are they using bills and bows? And of course, also, you've got relatively limited numbers of properly trained, experienced troops, and an awful lot of raised locals who've been called out to. They've trained to shoot bows, for example, but beyond that, they've probably done that at the archery butts every week since they were 10 years old. But they haven't actually stood in large formation and shot, and they certainly haven't stood there while somebody's coming towards them with the intent of cutting their head off. So the levels of skill and experience are all over the place in the armies, and we've got to try and get a proper reflection of that, and somehow try and reflect the attitudes of the nobles who are driving these guys into action. And I haven't really got down to the bottom of that yet. I don't want to just produce something which is it's just it's the basic game, but it's got a label on it that says War of the Roses. You need to make it feel right. So it'll take a while. It might take a lot longer than I'm hoping, but we shall see. We'll do our best.
It's just fascinating. I mean, there was so much backstage and changing of sides. I mean, even in mid-battle, a unit would change sides. You know, trying to reproduce something like that would I can imagine would be horrendous.
Yeah, it's difficult to replicate that in a normal tabletop game. You can do it if you're playing a campaign with people representing various nobles. You can then manage it so that you can get people potentially changing sides. It's very hard for the writer to put a single scenario together in which that's going to happen, because everyone's read the scenario before they start. They all know that Lord Grey of Roofin is going to let the enemy over his barricades at a certain point of the game. And that just doesn't work. So you have to have a context within which players can feel it's right, it's to their advantage to do this without it being obvious before the start of the game it's going to happen. And that's the kind of thing you've got to manage to work into it without it becoming too obvious up front. So you've got to make it possible, but not likely, so that the recipient of the treachery is looking the wrong way when it happens.
Yeah.
If they already know it's going to occur, then they're ready for it. And there's no point putting it in. So that's what we've got to puzzle our way through. But we'll see what we can.
Yeah, should be interesting.
Ian, you want to ask something else? Yeah, I'm talking over you.
I think how long we've been going? We've been keeping him busy now for nearly an hour.
Yeah. It's, I don't want to, but kind of something final, and I don't want to keep you more. Now I can imagine with all these issues with the pandemic and all the conventions and everything, it's a big blow to you guys, huh? It's a problem with presenting the new rules, making demo games. It's a problem now, correct?
Very much so, yes. All the events that we were scheduled to go to this year have all been cancelled. We were hoping that there's an event in November, usually at Reading. This year it was going to be at Ascot Racecourse in England, and we were very much hoping to be able to do something there, but that's gone as well. And we've just heard that the show at York in February isn't going to take place next year either, because they've just looked at the problems of social distancing and they can't make it work. So there's unlikely to be any decent show now before Salute next year. We have organised a small event of our own, we have one every year in February in Swindon here, which is only for 24 players, but it's an open invitation to anyone who wants to come along and they play for 2 days. And given the nature of the venue and the numbers of people, we can still do that because it's possible to make it work with social distancing. So we announced that last week. I think we sold 2/3 already. So it's definitely an appetite to still come and play. And that will be a medieval. But beyond that, we really haven't got anything lined up. And say we can't manage anything. So we're going to have to bite the bullet and use some technology. None of us here are particularly great with modern technology. We're quite slow to work out the benefits of channels like YouTube and all this stuff. So we are going to try and produce some videos looking at how the games play and a variety of things around that. I actually bought the camera for that some time ago, but nobody's been able to make the camera work properly yet, or found the time to do it. So we need to recruit a couple of 16-year-old staff, I think, so that they can make it all happen.
Yeah, they've been doing it from birth.
It's fantastic.
Going back to one thing, I know I'm on about the War of the Roses, which is way down the. Would Gripping Beast make figures for that in 28 to go along when the book was released?
That's a good question.
That's a good question. I want to ask you. That's a good question that Ian is saying. Is Gripping Beast thinking of expanding to other eras? Except you have Vikings, correct? Dark Ages is basically. I mean, like Ian says, War of the Roses or medieval or something. That. Seeing that the rules are very popular now.
Yeah, well, okay. There are a couple of points. First of all, Gripping Beast, as is at the moment, does produce a fairly wide range of eras. Certainly produces quite a lot of medieval stuff, but just not what you might expect. So we have ranges for things like the Teutonic Knights. We do medieval Russians, and things like, and later Byzantine troops and so forth. We have ranges for the Barons' Wars and so on. But undeniably, our main ranges are Dark Age. Plus, we do produce a variety of ancient period armies. So we have almost everything for the Punic Wars, for example, and we have Alexander's successors, and so on and so forth. So Gripping Beast will be looking at widening its offering. We're currently investigating new manufacturing methods, which will enable us possibly to get more things out there quickly. The other point is that there are actually two firms here, because we provide quite a lot of plastic models, but that is actually a different company. Not many people know that, called GB Plastics, and it's actually GB Plastics that produces all the Swordpoint. And we do produce various of the plastic ranges to go along with that. So that company also will be looking to widen the offering beyond producing. Don't know where we'll be going with it yet, but yes, we will be widening the scope of what we produce. Yes, it would be nice if we had some figures to go along with the 100 Years' War or the War of the Roses when we get the books out. But because it's GB Plastics that produces Swordpoint, it's not directly producing them in order to market Gripping Beast figures. They work in synergy, but not necessarily to the degree where we can't produce a book just because there are no GB figures for it. So, if we'd brought out the War of the Roses book when we originally intended to, we wouldn't have had time to produce any ranges for it. So all the figures in it would probably end up being very but when we get the chance, we will produce things. It isn't always possible, and it doesn't always go the way you hope. The first supplement after Army Lists that we brought out for Swordpoint was Charlemagne. And that was largely because I'd already written the manuscript for that for another game system, which then stopped publishing. So I was able to adapt it for our use. But we intended to have two new figure ranges come out alongside that book. And for a variety of reasons, mainly down to the sculptor, that didn't happen. One of those ranges has never appeared, and the other one appeared earlier this year. That's about 2 years after the book came out. So you don't always get what you want, even if your plan is to produce a bigger range. So yes, but we would like to produce a wider range of figures for a wider variety of periods. And wherever it's possible, we'll produce stuff to go with the books.
Well, I want to thank Martin for actually coming on and giving us an hour of his time, which is...
Thank you so much, Martin. I really appreciate it. Really appreciate it.
You're welcome. It's always interesting.
Carry on, Martin.
And
it's always interesting to hear the views of people who are playing the games or have had a look at them. So even when sometimes people say, I don't like your game, and this is why. I'm happy with that because it gives me ideas. I don't like it when they say, I don't like your game, I just don't like your game, and that's it. There's no reason for it, or I don't like your game. The worst is, I don't like your game because the rules don't help my army to win. That one I don't like.
Nothing to do with your tactics or dice rolling. No.
Who knows?
Really, Martin, thank you so much for coming. I really appreciate it. We will play with Ian many games. Swordpoint we play online because I'm in the Middle East or in Greece. Ian in the UK. We've been playing Ian online before the pandemic issue, so we're used to it. I have to say thank you so much for coming. It's a wonderful rules at Swordpoint. I've said to many friends of mine they should try it, especially for 28 millimeters. Just one word from you. I was just to ask you the last sentence. Are you happy where the rules have reached. I mean, the game became quite popular in a demanding and difficult, let's say, area of rules. You know, the rules are an acquired taste. Some people like we discussed this. We had this conversation with Ian long time. People like hundreds of modifiers. Other people like movements with special. You have to have all your kind of measurements, and if you move, they don't like free moves. I mean, there is a lot of different rule sets and different people, different tastes. But as far as you're concerned, you're happy with the rules now? They are popular. People are following them. I mean, how do you want to see them in the future?
Yeah, if you've sold books that you've printed, then the rules are a success in a commercial sense. You have to bear in mind that an awful lot of people buy rules and never actually use them. They just buy them for ideas. So you want to sell all of those copies of the book, which is great. We've been doing that. You also want to see that it's got a continued interest for people. So you look at when you publish a new supplement to go with the rules, does it sell? And at the moment, yes, they still sell, which means that not only have people bought the rules, but they're sufficiently interested to keep on investing in the game, which is nice. So while that happens, we'll continue to produce more content to go with it. It's nice to see it played in public. We like to see people playing it at tournaments and so forth, but tournaments are not the be-all and end-all of the game. So really, my measure of its success is that the products that we produce for Swordpoint are being purchased. And on that basis, yes, I'm very happy with it. I'm very nice.
Good.
That's great. Thank you, Martin, so much. I really appreciate you coming.